Okay, surprise, it's me again. Yes. It's not me alone. You will see we do have two great contributors on this panel. I would like to introduce you to the last panel of the day. It is, does data journalism help local press out of the crisis? It is hosted by the Institute of Democracy, Media and Cultural Exchange. My name is Friederike von Franke. I am a member of the Institute and I'm hosting this session. And we do have a really changed perspective today in this panel because we are moving the Berlin audience domination to online. Since my part here is rather unimportant, the most important part is taking place online. So hopefully the online audience will be participating very actively. And I'm very proud to introduce Altinay Mambetova and Anastasia Valeva. Altinay is a data journalist, trainer, and author of courses on data journalism and gender data communication. And she promotes data-driven initiatives in the region of Central Asia. Anastasia is a data journalism trainer, mentor, and editor as well. She has taught data journalism in Europe, Balkans, Central Asia, and Russia, and led data journalism courses at the American University of Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. And both are founders of the data school of the School of Data in Kyrgyzstan, and led numerous trainings with great results. And we are talking with them today and about what data journalism can help for trust and for local media. Specifically, local media have the trust and the loyal audience when local reporting is augmented with the power of data. It has huge potential for change. And this is not my wording, this is Anastasia Valeva's wording. And I would like to know, but how? We talked a lot of the different measures we can take up. We have seen from the last panel that you can have experimentation and that you can have audience connection, that you have a sense of nearness. So what can data journalism do, and how do these measures affect trust? Maybe Altinay first.
Great,
Welcome.
you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you, Friederike, and thank you for inviting us. So we're happy to be here and share our experience working in Central Asia, Eastern Europe. And for now, I want to just maybe present what we're doing at School of Data, so everybody would have a better understanding of how we work and what we're doing and how we are integrating local media as well in our activities. So let me share a presentation.
We have it on this server as well, so just in case.
Mm-hmm.
We can see something.
Presentation?
We can see something. Maybe you can enlarge it.
Mm-hmm.
Great, that looks brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here is about School of Data. And we are based in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and we work with Central Asia, South Caucasus, and Eastern Europe, which includes Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus as well. So we work to empower communities and expand opportunities to use data and build these partnerships between data users and data producers for a better ecosystem. And here is the important word, which is ecosystem. So as data journalists, we can't work especially in our countries, we can't just work with journalists and to build to promote data literacy overall in our society. We also try to integrate data producers as well, which include government officials, state departments, and universities, donors, and NGOs. So for that, we use different kind of activities and different kinds of instruments. We organize events to promote data literacy for a wider audience and to increase the level of understanding on why we need data and why the data needs to be open. And we also provide different educational initiatives as well. We publish our stories and our research projects, and we create different instruments as well to empower journalists and researchers in using this data. And my colleague Anastasia will tell in detail about our major activities.
Yes, thank you, Altanay. I will take it from here. Can you please go to the next slide? I will tell about a couple of things we implemented in the past 3 years. School of Data Kyrgyzstan is active since 2018. And our first event was a data journalism hackathon. So it's a combination of 2 words, hacking and marathon. And it comes from the IT sphere, but for the journalism, it means that we get journalists together with designers and analysts, and they spend some time together so that they produce stories based on data. So our first event was supported by EDAM, and we would like to underline that EDAM has been supporting us throughout all these years. And the hackathon would be just impossible without their help. So it was a success, and it was also the first public event of the School of Data. And we felt the need and the interest from local journalists to continue getting data skills, because hackathon is like a one-off event kind of experiment. But after that, we continued with more regular and sometimes longer interventions. So in terms of events, we started doing conferences. One of them was DataCon. You see in the middle, in the picture in the middle, it's a photo from that conference. We gathered 200 people. And when Altanay was talking about the ecosystem, it also means that all of these representatives from government and NGOs and business, they need to understand the value of data and also the value of people being informed about the data, to be working successfully together and to make public opinion based on data, and also to make data-driven decision making in the government. So after that, we also did a conference which was called Lampa, and this is a first data journalism conference in Russian. It is running events, so it goes every year online so far, but we hope to go offline sometime in the future. And apart from these big events, we also do lots of regular but smaller events, such as meetups. When somebody arrives in Kyrgyzstan or somewhere else, we just organize a short meetup with him or her, and public discussions, which we may touch upon later, but sometimes it is also based on the stories or research we do or we help to be published. And we do it in the local communities, with the local communities. Altanay, could you please switch to the next slide, where I talk about the education. This is another important component of our activities, of course. So we mainly work as a think tank or NGO between different actors. And because Altanai and myself and another partner, we are all journalists, communication and data journalism are one of really like the major activities we do. And so we just try to communicate these skills to journalism audiences. We try to empower them with data skills. And we can also talk about how hard and how successful it can be when talking about local media. We put some courses online, and we also have some long programs, like a year-long program. Right. I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And also, we want to do our own research and publications so that we lead the teams. Sometimes we include local journalists, sometimes we include students. I will talk about this particular project. It is called The Crack, Why Children in Kyrgyzstan Study in Extreme Conditions. I was a lead researcher at this project at the time when I was a professor at the American University of Central Asia. So I did it with my master students, and we compiled lots of government data sets that were in a bad shape, and we combined a database out of it, and we published it, but we did a media product out of it. So it was published by 8 media in Kyrgyzstan, both in Kyrgyz and Russian. And I guess it is also a result of our networking, because a lot of what we do is an attempt to build a community, because it really takes like the whole community to change things. We develop data journalism so that people can start thinking and argumenting with data, not with rumors. And that is a bigger change that just one article could do. Yes, and then Altanai will continue from here. Thank you.
So when we also talk about research and publication, I also want to mention about the instruments we're doing. And for instance, we've produced during the COVID crisis so that journalists could use open data to share about stories on how the pandemic has reached the Kyrgyzstan and what are the main complications. We scraped the online data for the journalists and researchers. So, and we created dashboards for decision makers, and sooner our instrument was used by the Ministry of Health, by mostly journalists and researchers to kind of measure the level of the crisis in our country as well. So, and you can always, if you want to learn more about School of Data, you can reach us at opendata.kg or email us. We would be happy to get back to you if you have any kind of questions to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Anastasia and Altanai, clearly your approach to trust would be start thinking and arguing. So evidence, give evidence and stop rumors. But as we can see from the COVID crisis, some people are decidedly choosing false information instead of evidence-based information. So maybe this approach isn't that powerful. What do you think? So your evidence approach, in a way, isn't that powerful. I mean, it should be, you say, if we can introduce reliable data and digestible data into local journalism, then trust in local journalism will increase. And because local journalism has also the nearness to the audience and can come up with local stories, and these stories can be supported by data, journalistic illustrations in a way, and data. But do you think that is enough, seeing at the COVID crisis? Do you think it will work? I mean, what is your experience in Kyrgyzstan so far? You are a young organization. The School of Data is a young organization, but still you have some years where you can see change maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we started working 4 years ago, and when we started working with journalism, there was like literally no data journalism in the country, and of course, the ones who are the first to get in the train of data-driven journalism were the central media in the capital. And when we went to the regions and when we worked with local journalism as well, the difference is I can relate to the whole Central Asian region as well. It's not only about the local and central media, it's also about the language barrier, because in like Central Asian countries we have two languages, which is Russian, and the other one is the local language, and then is the national language, and then the media, which is the central media, they mostly publish in Russian language, and of course they have to compete like with other international media in Russian languages as well, and that makes a huge difference because their audience is demanding the quality content and demanding the content that will be in line with other international like big Russian medias as well, Russian language medias as well. But when we take into account like local media, it's so this language barrier, it created a gap between between local and central media. So and there is a kind of a low demand from the audience as well there to understand and to understand and perceive data-driven publications as well. So it's like it's a complex problem, and which needs a strategy, really how would I say, a strategy which includes not only like teaching journalists how to use data, but also teaching the audience on how to understand this data and why we need data to like to make everyday decisions and to hold the government accountable. So that's the problem in our region.
Mhm.
Nastya, maybe you can share more about how it's in Russia.
Yeah, I will add with the perspective that I have of both working and living in Kyrgyzstan, but also coming from Russia and working in Russia. Frederica, I would say that not only local journalists need data, but also data journalists need local contexts. So it's actually impossible to be writing abstract data stories without referring to people who are affected by the problems you describe. So that is where we think it is the most powerful combination. And the thing is that sometimes when you touch upon things that you want to change, and these things are so deeply rooted in the communities. Let me make an example. We were working on a story with Kyrgyz speaking journalists about the it was about the early marriages, but we used the statistics of early maternal mortality and early infant mortality, so that women who give birth before 18, they have higher risk of dying, 1.5 times higher, and the same risk higher for their children to die. And we thought that this would be a very strong argument for local audiences to stop practicing these things, because this is something that, well, local people think is normal. And of course, when we're talking about mentality change, it's just a very long process. And after the article was published, we also organized a local discussion in Kyrgyz language. So I was there and I really didn't understand a lot, but I think it is for good, because people who were really, touched by this or described in this article. They were there, including some of the religious representatives of the city. And it was a really hot discussion because really some of them still argued it's all right, or like it's something that shouldn't be, I don't know, discussed in this way. And this is just the beginning of the change. When we talk about the pandemic, I think I will refer to what you said earlier, that in the times of crisis, we as people, we need information we can trust. That is true because like in Kyrgyzstan at least, all statistics for media just went really high. During the times of pandemic, everybody wanted to get some information and they were like looking for information they could trust. That was a good window of opportunity for media. And sometimes journalists, including data journalists, can use this to explain some things or to convince of doing something. For example, in data journalism, they really published lots of stories about why it is important to stay home, how you staying home can really decrease the number of, like hospital beds that will be needed in the near future, things like that. So for example, in Kyrgyzstan, government really failed, especially in the first wave of COVID. And when we published articles that were based on data that proved or explained why exactly the government has failed, where exactly it did wrong or it did not do anything, people really reacted sort of positively to that. They could relate to that. But when we talk about vaccine, for example, that is a different case, right? Because it seems like no matter how many articles you publish that like vaccine is for good, and you try to use database argument, well, people still take their own stance. And sometimes I think it is just a bigger trust issue because they generally distrust, for example, everything that is coming from the government. That is a thing that I observe happening in Russia right now. So I think that when we are touching very hard questions, it just is not enough to produce one data story or several data stories. It's just a need for a different society who thinks in different way and who trusts its sources of information. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Altina, would you like to add something?
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, I think I would agree totally with Anastasia that some kind of just doing the data journalism is not enough because the audience it needs other things. For instance, when we also taking account this, so before the COVID, we were doing this data journalism, data-driven seminars in regions for local journalists, and we were our approach was to empower journalists with data instruments so they can report better, to hold the local municipalities accountable for what they're doing. And then we just realized we just need to explain journalists why data literacy is important, because that was their need. And we, with our perspective, we think that they need data journalism, that it's going to somehow change the situation in the region. But in our case, when we went there and we actually were trying to help them, and when we were teaching how to use data, the need was totally different. So it's really important to engage with local media as well and try to understand in what kind of society and in what kind of like a social construct they are living in, and how to which ways to use to approach them, and how to communicate.
Yeah, thank you. I see parallels here with Stella in a way. I mean, the media the people working at the media themselves are in a way your audience as well as the audience of them. And as Stella pointed out, you also need to understand your audience and to find a fitting concept to communicate and relate with them. And also you said, considering the audiences with the early childbearing report, that you organized the discussion. So you also had a sense of nearness and closeness to a community. I am sure you could have had organized like 50 discussions, because so many people would attend, but of course resources are limited. And as we heard from Fahad today from Turkey, he pointed out that independent journalism or local news outlets in general have limited resources and personnel, for example, and that they are less, that they are better in employing a journalist or a person that is doing social media. So maybe this person could also do more on data journalism. So the independents are a little bit better than the big ones. But on the other side, on the other hand, little independent media outlets do have less personnel, but data journalism needs a person that can do it and that can write the stories, maybe even, or that can break down data, and then you would need an additional journalist to find the story behind the data and make it visible. So what do you think? I mean, I can come up to you and say, well, yeah, in my media outlet, I'm interested in data journalism, but unfortunately, I can't afford it. It's too costly. What would you say?
Altina, if it's okay, I could start. I would like to mention a little survey that we did when we were preparing to this conference, because during the time that we are working in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia and the whole Russian-speaking sphere of journalism, we we have some chats which include people who participated ever in our trainings or events. So we asked around, we asked, well, does local journalism needs data? And if so, which kind of data skills do local journalists need? And if there is a barrier, what is the barrier? So many really underlined that they need data skills, at least basic ones, but at the same time that it is costly and it is also hard in terms of time, because it's like investigations, basically. It takes sometimes 3-4 months for one story, and it's time consuming, and it is also resource consuming, because sometimes it's just you need to have a programmer, or sometimes you need a higher paid specialist. Which local newsrooms not always have. But many people in these discussions, they raised the model of collaborations when the data journalists from, well, think tank or just from the media that already has it can collaborate with the local journalist, and they could work on a story together. Now, that said, does it have some kind of shade of colonialism, or like the knowledge being brought down to the local scene? I think Altina, I really agree with her when she said that sometimes the local journalists, they don't realize their needs. So sometimes, like, we see that data journalism sometimes is being very elitist. People who already have digital skills, they use it only to make wonderful stories. But where data journalism is really needed is sometimes on the ground, solving real problems, or like talking about problems of real, like general people, ordinary people. And sometimes you need to close this gap, and you need to, like, explain to journalists and grow this demand, grow the demand for data. And you need to explain it to the editors as well, that they need to somehow invest in their stuff. So I see here some way out of this gap. Yeah, Altina, to you.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the main problem is the really low level of motivation, and of course the lack of resources as well. But journalists, and even which is more important, like editors, their approach is limited to the classic way of creating journalism stories, just by doing interviews or approaching one expert and then another and creating like a story. But I also see that the situation is going to change, but gradually. It's not going to change like in a year or in a month, because the audience is growing as well, and digitalization is reaching the wider audience in regions as well too. So the demand will be growing gradually, and so the journalists eventually would need to get in the train as well, as we saw during the pandemic, because even the local journalists, they needed to report on how the cases are rising and what is the situation, and by that they needed some data to create quality publications for the locals. And it's really, we see, I think, as an important point here to raise the data literacy level in general, like universities, local universities, and local public organizations, and even like government officials and state agencies in regions and in villages. Because there, in our experience, the most important stories are like hidden behind this the state departments, which are in regions as well. And of course, local journalism needs long-term investment for that, and which means trainings and maybe residences and collaborations with central media or professional data editors, which will shape the landscape. And yeah, this is the examples I can refer to.
Thank you so much. Just for clarification, raising the data literacy level, you mean within the journalist profession or for the audience?
Mm-hmm. I mean both, because we experienced, I think, in central media that raising just data literacy among journalists is not enough anymore, because journalists, they try to create even more complicated stories using data, and then your audience, it can't refer to these stories, or it doesn't understand what's in there and how to see these graphics or publications. So it's really important to build these partnerships between data users and producers, and among wider audience as well. It never goes just alone.
Okay.
It's an ecosystem, and we are so interdependent.
Okay, so to wrap it a little up, before I open the floor to the audience, and of course to the online audience as well, so please put in your questions into the chat or raise your hands if you're sitting here. To wrap it up, you would say that data journalism that is practiced at the local level in the media would enhance trust to this local media outlet. Would you say yes? Elena is nodding. Anastasia doesn't really know.
I mean, I think local journalism already has trust. It only, yeah, well, if the question is, will it enhance, then the answer is yes.
Okay, good. But then to come up with the obstacle of the resources, you suggested collaborations with the central for maybe the main city media, the big media, helping out with local media and getting a nice local story in exchange. Ferhat was suggesting something different. He said, as he was talking about the Turkish media landscape, he said, maybe we can have more collaborations in digital news making within the local or the independent media outlets. That was his case, and I could transfer it to your case and could say maybe collaboration within the local newspapers would be okay as well, and then maybe not having adverse effects of less trust because you are collaborating with a centralized newspaper or a centralized media. So would that be an option to have a local network, so to speak?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Definitely. I think that's important as well too. In our but in our experience, we have created these stories which included different regions and talking about the central problem, but in a regional perspective, and that worked as well. But in our experience, it's not. It didn't end up in a long-term collaboration. It was just one-time activity.
Okay.
I would like to add that regarding the regional networks, there is just a question of who will have the expertise with data. And when we're saying data, we really don't mean big data. We actually mean small data sets. Sometimes it's local budget. Sometimes it's just like the local numbers for anything, literally. So it's just a small Excel sheet. But you probably know that even open an Excel file sometimes is something journalists never did in their professional life. So we just teach them how to work with that. So it's not rocket science. That is what I'm trying to say. And even with that, I think there is little imbalance of power when you are trying to teach data journalism, because it's a little bit like you are given the knowledge and the other side has to perceive it. So I think we are trying to really avoid it by giving the co-owning the projects with the local journalists. We try to motivate them to bring their own ideas so that we only show them how to test it with data, but it's their project, it's their idea in the first place.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Sophie, please.
Sorry, it's me again, Sophie Janusz. I'm the coordinator of the FOME network. I have two questions. The first one is, could either Altinay or Anastasia give us examples of what do you think are the most interesting untold stories? I mean, maybe it's not a story, but where you think journalists should investigate into it. And the second point is, I did not understand really what the motivation should be for local journalists to do all this tiring research if they already survive, if they are trusted, if they are in good terms with their community. And if you say they're not motivated, so what do you tell them? Why should they do it?
And maybe Brigitte's question just ahead. Continue. Yeah.
Thank you. It's actually related. You are talking about, Altinay, that your objective is that the local, that the messages in the local media become even stronger and the adoption of the recommended action in terms of COVID or other things becomes stronger. On the other hand, you also say that you hope to use the data, the information to hold authorities to account. So I was just wondering, do you have some examples of either or both of these two types of impacts emerging from your work?
Thank you very much. Altinay, would you start with answering?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start with the last question first, and then move to the first question. So in our experience, if we talk about the recent publication about the COVID data and pandemics, it was the case that so there was no data on how the online education went either successful or unsuccessful, and how the government should make a decision whether the next semester for schools should be held online or offline. And as a journalist, of course, didn't have data to report on it, and the government was not telling the reasons why they put one decision or why they are making the other decision. So as data reporters, we started just collecting the data and making surveys from teachers and from students. How do they feel about online education? Is it secure for them? And what are the results, and how do they, if they want it to be continued or not anymore? And as a result, we shared our publication as well, with empowered with data and empowered with comments of students who suffered actually from not seeing their peers, and from teachers who couldn't get the student involved in the online discussion, because the students, school children, they would have to work, do the household course, and look after their grandparents, look after younger siblings, and they couldn't attend classes online. So it was a big story, and it ended up as a discussion in the ministry, and journalists and researchers who did this story as well, they were invited to share the results. And this is just one of the examples on how data-driven publication actually empower citizens and give a voice to the problems that are not being said.
Thank you very much. And Anastasia?
Yeah,
Would you add something?
Try to add something to the questions that were asked regarding the untold stories. I think, well, when you just start in some region, there's just a level of low-hanging fruits. Usually it's about the most general indicators connected to SDGs, such as maternal mortality, child health, access to education, access to healthcare, access to clean water. So basic human rights. You can just investigate how equal is the society in terms of these data sets. And you can, only with data, you can highlight where the most affected communities are. When we're speaking about more advanced, let's say, data journalism, is where all the open data has been analyzed. This is a situation that we have right now in Kyrgyzstan. And I think this is a time to start own data collection, the case like Altinai just explained. So sometimes there is a gap of data or just the lack of data. And this is an opportunity for data journalists to come up with some solutions, not only collecting the data themselves, but talking with social media, for example, and businesses, and persuading them to provide their data for journalism research. And regarding the motivation that local journalists should have, well, I actually, I agree that sometimes it is a problem, the motivation itself, because it's just sometimes you come to the region and you see that they are used to be working the way they have been working. So why should they invest in it? But always there are people who are really motivated after the training. And I think this is also how we got into this. We just learned it at some training, and It's just the power of data, the power of the stories you can tell with it that you wouldn't be able to tell otherwise. This itself should be a motivator, like what I think it should be a motivation. Of course, in the realities of like life and work, sometimes stipends are a motivation. In our experience, we find it as a working mechanism to increase the number of stories being published. So we sometimes use stipends to support production of data stories.
So, Sophie, the reasoning is you're tapping into the desires of being a journalist, the curiosity, the need to tell a story, the want to tell a story, and then maybe some economical reasons that you are able to produce better and more stories, maybe nationwide. So that may be enough, but still you have to invest something in the first place, of course. So any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Bahia Albrecht from the DW Academy. Just a really quick question to you guys. So first of all, I followed some of the School of Data project, and it's cool to have 2 women from Kyrgyzstan here representing it, just saying that. And a really small practical question is that when I talk to data journalists, they often say that they really love to show their method and how they got the data, and all the articles have quite a big introduction into the methods itself. And I think some studies, and I think even Benjamin said this morning, the audience are sometimes not that much interested, less interested in how people, journalists came on the data, or interested in how they worked out the data. And I just wanted to ask if that's a problem you face as well, how you deal with that, and yeah.
Can you repeat it? I didn't crack it. So the problem was how you get the data. The audience is not interested in how you.
When you talk to data journalists in Germany especially, they sometimes say, like, I have put so much work into my article, and I want to explain how I did the work behind it. But the audience is normally not interested in the work behind it. And I think that's a common problem in data journalism, and I just wanted to address that and maybe get a perspective out of Kyrgyzstan. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. It's a really interesting one because so when we teach, or when we do, or when we mentor like data publications, we always try to put an explanation if something was calculated, and we are making remarks on this, how it was calculated and how we collected data and what are the limitations as well. And I think it's really important for professionals and for other journalists as well. And also we put emphasis on sharing. So we put a link on the data whenever we refer in the publication to the numbers. And sometimes there are some so audience is not like homogeneous, and there are different specialists and maybe researchers who really want to understand how you made these calculations and how you collected this data. And sometimes we always receive like questions from different people on why we took this data instead of other data, and why we calculated this way when we could do it in another way. And in this case, it's really important to be transparent on your methodology and on your remarks as well.
Yeah, I would like.
Any comments? Yeah.
I would like to add to this that in Kyrgyzstan, when we started doing data journalism projects, we follow well, the best and the first examples in the field, which are coming from the US, UK, Europe, etc. And sharing the methodology is really a standard in this field, which is quite rare, I think. For example, in data investigations, in journalism investigations, it's not always clear what they did, how they obtained the data, what is the, like, not the data, the source, what is the information they really used. But in data journalism stories, you can really replicate the story if you want, step by step, with the description of data and the description of the methodology. It is rather a must than a nice to have thing for data journalism. But usually it comes under some hyperlink. So you just write, if you want to read how we did it, this is where you can go, and there is a link. And the same goes for the data. So I think it is important to share it, because speaking of trust, is just one more method to show that you are transparent with your audience, and you are ready for scrutiny from their side if they want.
Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. I think we have seen this was like a deep dive into what you can do to enhance trust with local media. One measurement of it, and we discussed it quite thoroughly. And I'm really glad that we had this all-female panel in here, and with an intern with an IT topic as well. So I wish you all the best for the future of the School of Data in Kyrgyzstan. I thank you very much that you have been here and that you shared your experiences. I thank you all having listened until the very end of this day, of this interesting day. And with this panel, we wrap up the first day of Trust in Media. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We are going to continue tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. And here's a little trick. If you don't want to get tested tomorrow morning, we have asked the test taxi to come right now, and you can do your test right now. Then you don't have to wait in the cold tomorrow morning.